Welcome to Let's Feed Liam episode 2, a series where I make all of my friend's favorite foods work for his diet journey. This is Liam. This boy loves his chocolate donuts, so today we're going to be making a super low-calorie, high-protein version that tastes incredible and will keep his diet goals on track. Let's get into it. Pretty much the entirety of baking can be brought down into two simple ideas, your dry ingredients and your wet ingredients. So as we make these donuts, I know it seems complex, because it's like, well, I haven't made that before. It's like, right, but as long as you know how to mix dry ingredients and wet ingredients together, form a batter, and pour it into a thing, it's that easy. All the recipes that I make don't really require a lot of cooking experience. You don't need to be crazy smart. You just need basic motor skills and the ability to count. I'm gonna start off with a cup of self-rising flour. Self-rising flour is just flour that has a little bit of baking powder and salt, so you don't need to add that in yourself. You can make your own self-rising flour though. If you just have regular flour, you add a little baking powder and salt, you'll be good to go. So the dry ingredients of this recipe are really simple. You've got your flour, you've got your protein powder, you've got your granulated sugar. Oh yeah, and your cocoa powder to make it a chocolate donut. And that's it. You're gonna combine those with wet ingredients and get a nice batter, making this whole process super easy. So one thing of note, when it comes to protein powders and baking, most protein baked goods taste horrible, almost a challenge to get down. And the reason is that they're super, super dry. That's because most of the time when people bake with protein, they're using the regular protein powder. If you're going to bake with protein powder at all, you have to either use plant-based protein or whey casein protein, which is a type of protein that has its molecular structure is a little different, so it retains moisture better, makes it work better in the baking process. So when I bake, I tend to use plant-based protein powder. I don't really consume it normally, but it's great for baking because plant-based and casein protein, they hold more moisture, so they're way better for baking. Got our third cup of cocoa powder here. I'm kind of running low, but I should have enough. Cocoa powder is the type of thing too, where it's like if you have a little bit less than the amount, it's not the end of the world, it's just slightly less chocolatey. You know what I mean? I'm just gonna dump the rest of this in. I'm gonna save a little bit left over because later when we make the icing, we wanna make sure it's chocolate flavored. And then we're gonna put in our granulated sugar. Sugar has a lot of calories. If you're gonna add it to anything, you just wanna be conscious about it. There's always a lot of different sugar alternatives that you can use that will make your recipe still taste fine, but won't add nearly as many calories. So to make this, I'm gonna be using Splenda brown sugar. Brown sugar is great for baking in general. It gives a really good, soft, moist texture. It holds itself together really well. It's, like I said, it's great for baking. The Splenda brown sugar is basically half brown sugar and half of the Splenda mixture that has far fewer calories. So this is gonna be a great option if you're trying to keep those calories lower. The other thing I'd say, this is just out of my own personal experience with baking and looking at recipes and all that. The amount of sugar in most recipes is not necessary. People put a cup of sugar in something and it's just it's a ridiculous amount of calories. I'm just gonna use a little bit less than 3/4 of a cup here. I've kind of filled this up, it's fine. I'm being a bit loosey-goosey with it, but I think that it's often better than just doing the full amount or packing it in, You can get by with a lot less. These are also gonna have icing, so I promise you won't be able to tell the difference. So we've got all of our dry ingredients together. That wasn't so bad. Got our cocoa powder, sugar, protein powder, and our flour. We're gonna mix it together, and then we're gonna add our wet ingredients in. And there's just two. You just have any kind of neutral oil, like I'm gonna be using a coconut oil, but pretty much any oil will work, and milk, and that's it. So we've got the coconut oil here. We need 6 of these, 6 tablespoons. That's 1, that's 6. Teensy tiny bit of vanilla extract just for some flavor. And lastly, the milk. So when it comes to milk, you've got a lot of options. I'm gonna talk about 2 that are especially diet friendly. Milk is not the end of the world. Drinking it's not gonna, end your diet. It's not one of those foods you have to steer, super far away from, like fried foods and French fries and stuff that's just empty calories and super high volume calories. It's not like that, but there are improvements you can make to milk. So here are 2 that I'd recommend considering for different uses. First is Fairlife milk. Fairlife milk is ultra pasteurized, so it has less sugar, has more protein. It's basically ultra filtered milk. And the macros on it are kind of crazy. So here you've got 120 calories, 13 grams of protein. Coming back to our ratios, that's greater than a 10% ratio between the protein and the milk, 13 over 120, right? So then look at this. You have 160 and 8 grams of protein. That sucks. I mean, by comparison, that's like a 5% ratio. If you wanted to get greater than 10% of a ratio on this 160 calorie thing, you need 16 plus grams of protein. But you don't, you only get half of it, you get 8. So its ratio is about 5%. This one is over 10. So you're getting they say double, but it's technically a little bit more than double of the grams of protein that you are for the calories. So this is a great option. This is gonna keep your protein levels high and your calories a lot lower. If you want an ultra low calorie option, which is what we're gonna use for these donuts, you wanna use something like this, an unsweetened almond milk. Now look at these. You got 30 calories. I mean, even the Fairlife one, it's got 120. 30 is a quarter. I mean, that's crazy. It's the same serving size too, it's a cup. Obviously, there's a lot less protein because almond milk and plant milk in general is not super protein rich. But It's a great solution for baking if we want to keep our calories low. And when we're making a baked good, like, yeah, we're using protein powder, we're gonna add a little bit in there, but this is not like insanely high protein food. It's much more about creating the baked good experience, making it delicious and satisfying while keeping it low calorie enough to fit our goals. So we are putting some protein in, but the highlight is the number of calories in this. All right, so we've got a cup of milk. And all that's left to do now is just to whisk it together. In general, you want to mix this batter until you stop seeing clumps, which for the most part, it's pretty smooth, right? Most of the clumps that might come from flour or the protein powder have been mixed out, and we're left with this nice batter. And the key test is, you should be able to pour it. Let's get to baking. This is a donut mold. It was like $8 on Amazon. If you wanna take this batter and turn it into muffins, you can totally do that. There are no rules about how this batter gets baked. It can be baked into anything. You probably, haven't done this before, you probably bake like an entire loaf of bread, chocolate bread out of this. I'll try that another time. But for this one, we're just gonna use a really simple donut mold. I prefer, there's generally two kinds. There's like the metal kind, and then there's the silicone kind. I like the silicone kind because when the donuts are done, look at this. Boom. Just pop them out, right? Super easy to get them out without like digging in. Last thing we're gonna do just before we pour everything in here is, we wanna make sure that this is greased so it doesn't stick. We don't need a lot of spray, and I'm certainly not just gonna dump oil in here because that's gonna add a ton of calories. I'm just gonna use this really low calorie vegetable oil cooking spray. It's gonna keep things pretty minimal. There we are. We have to get this in that. And the easiest way to do that is not by pouring it, which is a disaster, but by piping it through a bag. So Liam's gonna open a Ziploc bag here. I'm gonna show you the technique. All right, we've got our batter in the bag. The idea is, all you do is just snip off a corner of it, and then you pipe it into the donut thing. Boom.
So when you're filling these up, how much do you fill them up to?
It's a good question. Whenever you're baking something like this, it's always gonna rise a little bit. So, if you do it right at the top, it's gonna get kind of aggressive. It's also just a question of how big you want them to be. Maybe like a 1/4 inch below the top, so they have some room to rise. I'm not getting too aggressive. I've got some extra batter, and I've got an unused muffin tray that is calling my name. Oh yeah, so the top of the bag popped. Don't do that, don't do that. Definitely make sure the bag is sealed, or you're gonna have a mess like me. Fortunately, I'm able to control it enough. Sometimes baking's a little messier than you want it to be, and that's okay. We made our batter. We've got them in the mold. I want to put them on this cookie sheet because last thing I want to do when I'm pulling these out of the oven is have a floppy silicone mold fall out of my hand or a donut slip out and hit the bottom of the burner. This is just an easier thing to hold. It gives them a kind of platform to rest on. So we're going to throw these in at 350 degrees for about 13 minutes, 13 to 15 minutes, until a toothpick comes out clean. Let's start the timer and let's be patient. All right, we've got our donuts baked. We're going to pull them out of the oven. There we go. We're gonna run the old toothpick test. For those of you wondering why, because if it sticks to the toothpick, it's still runny on the inside. That's how you know. So the right donut, or baked good in general, is gonna be clean on the finish. So that's good. Before we finish these off with the icing, we're gonna let these cool for about 10 minutes. Then we'll come back and make the icing and finish the job. All right, we've got our donuts out of the oven. They've cooled off enough for us to ice them properly. Now to make the icing here, I'm gonna leave those there actually. Make the icing, I'm gonna grab my little bowl, and I'm gonna grab, this is powdered sugar. This is 0-calorie powdered sugar. There are a few powdered sugars out there, you can find them at most grocery stores, that have, just like Splenda exists for regular sugar. You have like, I don't think it's the actual Splenda brand, but you have other variants of powdered sugar that are lower in calorie that don't use the same kinds of sweeteners. Some are sweetened with monk fruit, some are sweetened with different things. But this will help keep the calories really low, because if we were just gonna use a cup of this, or however much for the whole batch, it's a lot of calories. This has close to zero. It has something, but it's close to zero. So we're gonna take about a cup of this powdered sugar. I'm gonna start off with half a cup and just see where that gets me. We're gonna add a little bit of cocoa powder. So we saved a little bit left. We had a tiny bit left here. Throw that in. And then milk. Once again, we're using the ultra low calorie milk just to keep our numbers lower. A little bit less than a 1/4 of a cup. And we're gonna add powdered sugar until we get the right consistency, but this is about the amount. We're gonna whisk this together, create a nice little glaze for ourselves.
So how thick should this be?
It's a good question. You do want it to be on the thinner side, so not like a thick icing that you're pasting over. It's more like a glaze.
You just suggested like using your best judgment?
Yeah, but this one's tricky. It's hard to describe. You want You want something that you can pour, right? But you don't want it to be so thick that when you pour it, it sort of sludges out. Like you don't want it like the consistency of batter. You want it to be something like, you know, you see those, like you go to Krispy Kreme or something, you ever see how the Krispy Kremes are made? And there's like a long tray of them and there's just this like thin sheet of icing that's just glazing them. That's what you want to do. So to get a good glaze, I think this is probably the right consistency here. You don't want it too thin because then it'll fall off, it won't stick at all. This should be good. So now we're gonna take our tray here.
Now are you gonna drizzle it on or are you gonna dip them in?
I'm gonna dip them in. That's actually a good idea. I was just gonna drizzle it over, but I think it might work better if we dip them, because then we can just set them down and we're not gonna create nearly as big of a mess. All right, so we've got our donuts here. I'm just gonna pop them out of the mold, as you can see. Oh man, they feel so fluffy. Like, look at this. Kind of squish it a little bit. That's lovely. So we're gonna pop all these out. Just to prove a point, by the way, put the rest of the batter in this muffin tin just to show you that it works. So we've made muffins as well. These look just as good, have the same kind of fluffy texture. Keep them over here for now, but you can make muffins out of these too. All right, let's dip our donuts. Well, we've got our donuts ice, dipped them in our low-calorie icing, and now we're just gonna add some sprinkles on top, because who doesn't love sprinkles? The donuts have been sprinkled on. We've got them all set, so now we're gonna enjoy them. Liam, this one is for you. Actually, these three are for you, because you can have them. There's only 100 calories in each of those.
Cheers.
Cheers. Wow.
Mmm. All this squishy goodness. Mmm.
Look at how soft that is. It breaks apart. It's so moist, so rich. You wouldn't know there's protein in that. But there is. And that is how you make sub 100 calorie donuts that are rich, covered in icing. They're soft, they're delicious, and they are a diet saver. You don't have to give up on your favorite foods to stay in shape and lose weight, and these donuts are a great example of that. Till next time.